Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we synthesize the source material you send us, cut through the noise, and get to the heart of what you need to know.
And today we are tackling a big one, a real giant of literature.
We're getting into Miguel de Cervantes' masterpiece, Don Quixote.
It's a book everyone has heard of, but you see this one phrase again and again in the sources. It's the first modern novel.
Which is such a huge claim, right? I mean, it's over 400 years old. It's about a guy who thinks windmills are monsters. So what makes it modern?
That's the mission for today. We're going to dig into that claim. We're looking at the big themes, idealism versus reality, but also the narrative structure itself.
And the humor. We can't forget the humor. The sources all point out that Cervantes is using comedy to talk about some incredibly deep ideas.
Exactly. So we're going way beyond just the windmills today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start at the very beginning, before he even puts on the armor. Who is the man who becomes Don Quixote?
His name is Alonso Quijano, and he's a perfectly normal minor nobleman. And Hidalgo,
Living out in La Mancha, in rural Spain. He's getting on in years. He's got a bit of money, but he's bored out of his mind.
Completely. And he has one passion, one obsession: reading books of chivalry, knightly romances.
And we're not just talking about a hobby. This is an addiction. He's selling off his land, his property, just to buy more of these books.
Right. He reads constantly, day and night. He doesn't sleep. He barely eats. And his mind just gets flooded. All these stories of knights and princesses and evil sorcerers start to blur with his reality.
Until they become his reality.
Precisely. He literally reads himself into madness.
The sources have a great modern analogy for this. It's like if you spend all day, every day, watching superhero movies or playing fantasy video games, and one morning you wake up and decide, that's it, I'm putting on a cape, I am a superhero now.
That is the perfect way to think about it. And what's so brilliant, and the sources really emphasize this, is that Cervantes was kind of critiquing the mass media of his time.
The chivalric novels were like the blockbusters of the 1600s.
They were cheap, formulaic, everywhere. And Cervantes saw people getting obsessed with this stuff, and he basically wrote a novel asking, okay, but what if you actually tried to live like that?
So Alonso Quijano decides he is now Don Quixote de la Mancha, but reality immediately starts pushing back. He can't just go out and buy a shining suit of armor.
No, of course not. He finds some old rusty pieces that belong to his great-grandfather. There's a piece missing in the helmet, so he fixes it with some cardboard.
Cardboard, okay.
And his horse, his mighty steed, it's Rocinante, who is this old, bony, broken-down farm nag. It can barely stand up.
And every knight needs a lady to fight for.
Right. So he invents one. Dulcinea del Toboso. In his mind, she's the most beautiful princess in the world. In reality, she's a local peasant girl who he maybe saw once from a distance.
So every single part of his new identity is just a shabby, real-world version of the fantasy in his head.
Exactly. And that gap between the grand idea and the pathetic reality is where all the humor comes from.
But a knight can't go on an adventure alone. He needs a squire.
And this is where the story truly takes off. He finds Sancho Panza,
A local peasant farmer.
a simple, pragmatic man, not a reader, very much grounded in the real world. And Quixote promises him that if he comes along as his squire, he'll get rich and maybe even become the governor of an island.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because these two characters, they could not be more different.
Not at all. They are total opposites. You have Don Quixote, who is pure idealism. He looks at the world and sees only what he's read about in his books. He sees enchanters and giants everywhere.
And then you have Sancho, who sees what's actually there. He's the voice of reality. He's worried about food and money and whether they're going to get beaten up again.
Again, because they get beaten up a lot.
They do. So is Sancho just in it for himself at the start? Is he just a cynical guy trying to get an island?
I think at the beginning, yes, absolutely. He's totally self-interested. He thinks Quixote is nuts. But the promise of an island is, it's a pretty good offer.
It's a great offer.
But what the sources show and what makes the book so profound is that they start to influence each other.
How so?
Well, Sancho never fully buys into the delusions, but he starts to see a kind of nobility in Quixote's madness. He starts to care about him. And Quixote, because Sancho is always asking these very practical questions.
Like, master, that's an inn, not a castle. Where are we going to tie up the donkey?
Exactly that. Because of Sancho, Quixote is constantly forced to confront reality, even if he just immediately comes up with some magical explanation for it. It's this constant conversation, this push and pull.
The ideal versus the real in every single scene.
And that dynamic, that tension, is really the engine that drives the whole narrative.
So before we get to the most famous example of that clash, let's talk about the big claim, the first modern novel. The sources say it's about more than just the characters. It's about the structure.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the really revolutionary thing Cervantes did was metafiction. The book is aware that it's a book.
What does that even mean for a novel from 1605? How do you break the fourth wall back then?
Okay, so this is just amazing. The first part of the book was a huge bestseller, a smash hit. So 10 years later, Cervantes writes part 2.
Right.
And in part 2, the characters, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, have read part 1.
Wait, what? So the fictional characters in the story know that they are famous.
Right.
Because they're characters in a book that's been published within their world.
Yes, absolutely. They meet people on the road who recognize them, who say, hey, you're the guy from that book. People argue with Quixote about things that happened in the first book.
That's incredible.
It gets even crazier. A fake sequel written by another author was published before Cervantes could finish his. So in his own part 2, Cervantes has his characters talk about the fake sequel and complain about how badly it portrays them.
So he's actively critiquing a literary knockoff inside his own story.
He is. He's playing with the whole idea of what a story is, who controls it, and the relationship between fiction and reality. That kind of self-awareness, that reflection on the act of storytelling itself that had never been done before. That is profoundly modern.
Wow. It's not just a story anymore. It's a story about stories.
Exactly. And that takes us to the perfect example of how all these ideas, idealism, reality, storytelling, come together in one iconic scene.
We have to talk about the windmills.
We have to talk about the windmills. It's the scene everyone knows. They're on the plains of La Mancha, and up ahead, Quixote spots 30 or 40 windmills.
And Sancho, of course, says, look, windmills.
Yes, structures for grinding corn. But Quixote, he sees something else entirely.
He sees an army of monstrous, swaggering giants. And he believes it with every fiber of his being.
It's his duty as a knight-errant to fight them. Sancho is pleading with him, Master, I'm telling you, they're windmills. But Quixote's already gone. He's in his story.
He puts his lance down, spurs Rocinante on, and just charges.
Yeah. And, the inevitable happens. A sail catches his lance and it shatters it, throwing him and his poor horse violently to the ground.
And this is where that comedy meets the philosophy, because Sancho runs up to him, and he's not even saying, I told you so. He's just saying, didn't I tell you they were windmills?
But Quixote's fantasy is completely unshakable. It's bulletproof. He doesn't say, oh, you were right. He says that his arch nemesis, the evil enchanter Freston, must have transformed the giants into windmills at the very last second.
Just to rob him of the glory of victory.
Exactly. He never, ever admits that his perception was wrong. He just expands the fantasy to explain away the inconvenient reality. He rationalizes the pain.
And he does this all the time. The sources bring up another great example with the barber's basin.
Ah, yes, the legendary helmet of Membrino.
So he sees a barber riding with a metal basin on his head to protect him from the sun.
And Quixote is convinced it's this mythical golden helmet that makes its wearer invulnerable. He attacks the barber, who runs away terrified, leaving the basin behind.
And Quixote proudly puts this shaving basin on his head.
He does. And the best part is Sancho's reaction. He knows it's a basin. He tells him it's a basin. But Quixote is so convinced. And Sancho he sort of gives in. He goes along with it.
He helps rationalize it.
Yeah, he says something like, well, to me it looks like a basin, but maybe that's because I'm not a knight. I'm sure it really is a helmet. He becomes complicit in the fantasy.
So what does this all mean? The book isn't just a funny story about a crazy old man. It's a deep look at how we build our own reality.
It really is. It's about belief and perception. And what makes it so powerful is that Quixote, for all his madness, is genuinely noble. His intentions are heroic. He wants to right wrongs and protect the innocent. He just fails spectacularly every single time.
So it's a story about the power of belief. The power of creating your own meaning in the world, even if no one else sees it your way.
And Cervantes uses that dynamic, that constant clash between the deluded knight and his practical squire, to explore these huge philosophical questions. Is it better to live a noble fantasy or a disappointing reality?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into what might be a lot more than just a story about fighting windmills.
A pleasure. It's a book that just keeps on giving.
And here's a final provocative thought for you. Based on the material we've synthesized today, if Quixote's delusions are a wild reflection of a life lived for ideals, no matter how misguided, does the novel suggest that a world without any fantasy at all, like Sancho Panza's world at the beginning, is maybe a bit empty? Does true meaning lie not in choosing one or the other, but in trying to navigate that chaotic, funny, and often painful space between the dream and the reality? Something to think about until our next deep dive.